one day she asked him in despair, she said, Rabbi, when is this going to stop? Like, how long am I going to grieve her? And he paused for a minute and he said, well, how long did you love her? And she paused and she said, forever. And he said, yeah, that's the answer. You're going to grieve her forever. And, you know, if that's the case, and I believe that's probably true, I know that it changes. It doesn't always stay as heavy as it felt for her that day. You know, the texture of it changes and the grip that it has on you changes and the heaviness changes. But if it's going to be with us forever, well, why not try to befriend it? And as I said, this learning came at the perfect time because my mom was diagnosed with lung cancer. And the time, you know, the grief of that, even the anticipatory grief of it was deep. Like, I mean, Grand Canyon deep. We were so close. And she used to say to my sister and I both, you are my heart beating outside my chest. And she was just such a beautiful soul and just made life so amazing. And with lung cancer, we had a whole year to say goodbye. We didn't know that, of course, at the time, but it was an interesting year. I just got all these nudges as this year went on about places we should go and things we should do and conversations we should have and truths we should tell and videos we should make and all of these things. It was honestly, it was the best year and the hardest year that I can think of. And right near the very end, and here's where these little breadcrumbs come, right near the very end, she said to me one day, she said, Trace, how are you going to go back to your real life? I mean, you've been here almost every day, every night. How are you going to go back to your real life when I'm gone? And we had agreed to tell each other the truth, even if it was hard. So I really thought about it before I answered. And somehow what I came up with was, you know what, Mom? I've never even taken a breath without you on this earth. So I don't honestly know how I will do it. I know that I will. I have a very compelling life and you made me strong. So I promise you I will do it. But again, I've never taken a breath on this earth without you. So I can't tell you I know how. And fast forward almost 2 years, still some dark days. Some really well-meaning friend said something that they meant to be very comforting. And we all do this. I'm sure I probably said something similar. But they said to me, you know what? She'll always be with you. You'll feel her right beside you. She will never leave. She's always right there. And instead of being comforting, that actually taunted me a little bit because for some reason I could not feel her. I mean, I could call up beautiful memories and I could get like a little emotional rush. And at least once a day, I would see 11:11 on the clock. And that would remind me. Someone told me that's kind of a sign that, you know, your person is thinking about you. So I kind of like took it to heart. I love to see this 11:11. So I had all these kind of rituals that happened, but I could not feel her. And I felt so broken. I thought, we were so close and I'm such a deeply feeling person. What is wrong with me? Like, am I broken or what's happening? Am I damaged? I just felt confused and deflated until the day that I met Dr. Dan Engel. And I was invited by someone on this call who I love to a very sacred gathering. And it just unfolded beyond my wildest imagination. I had the most poignant integration with grief that I ever could have imagined. And I think I was like the least likely candidate for this kind of work. My kids would say I was kind of buckled up and I did kind of resist it a bit until I didn't. And if you have resistance as you're listening to this about, you know, psychedelics, it feels like something that's unknown or maybe not in your wheelhouse. I would say, you know, don't worry about that. There's so many ways to access wisdom and downloads and, you know, other levels of consciousness. And this book, Breath, is a really good resource by James Nestor. And thank you, Eileen, for that recommendation, because it's such a beautiful resource for other ways that you can access the wisdom. So maybe as I tell this brief little story about how I was given the gift of befriending grief. You could imagine whatever tool you wish, whatever tool feels most comfortable to you. But I'll tell you this brief story. As I was preparing for this beautiful ceremony with some really special people, a small group, we were setting intentions, and I was calling in gentleness. Gentleness for the way I felt inside, gentleness for the way I was speaking to myself, and gentleness for my grieving. And I remember, and maybe you remember now, this is the breadcrumb. My mom asked me how I was going to get back to my regular life. And I had said to her, I haven't even taken a breath on this earth without you. Well, interestingly enough, during the opening circle, there was this beautiful, another facilitator, this beautiful woman. I can see her in my mind's eye right now. And she was also guiding a small group of us. And she said, you know, if it's a first experience for you, if there's any time that you feel like you need grounding, just know that you can always come home to your breath. Those were her exact words. And I can picture her. She planted something so beautiful in my mind and then unlocked something really special a little bit later as we were moving through just the most beautiful experience of my life, with Dr. Dan by my side, you know, mask on, beautiful playlist, private space. And occasionally, you know, he would sort of come and check in as the other facilitators would do. And there was sort of this agreement that if you were really deep in some beautiful spot, you could kind of give like a little pause motion so you could stay with it. And in fact, this happened. I was in this beautiful, blissful moment, and I could kind of feel, I could feel his presence come. So I did something very confusing. I did a combination of the pause sign, and at the same time, I like pulled my mask down and I asked this question. I said, Dan, is it 11:11 a.m.? And he checked his watch and he said, it's exactly 11:11 a.m. And if I didn't have voice notes, I wouldn't believe it. But at any rate, I said, I knew it. I knew it. She's here. She's right here. And God's here too. And I'm going back in. And here I was, and in that space, and this was my truth in that moment, in that space, my mom was completely there. She was weaving gentleness with this loom, this beautiful indigo and violet sort of silk thread, weaving this gentleness like right into my soul. And she said, I have an infinite amount of gentleness now, and I will share it with you happily. And she said, Tracey, I've been here all along. You were just so heavy with the grief. It was hard for you to feel me. But, you know, my vibrations kept getting higher in these upper realms, and yours were kind of locked down with this grief. And she said, I'm so grateful that you found the vibration in this gift of medicine and music and experience. Thank you for trusting the person that invited you. And I have to say, it was like quite a moment. And in my experience, God was there too. And God said in that very moment, your mom and I gave you breath. That you can always come home to. Each time you take an intentional breath, it is proof that we are one. Come home to the breath. And it is proof that we are one. And I took this special breath. I was aware we were all completely united in the breath of life. And I have never felt alone since that very moment. You know, in that moment, I knew there was no separation. And it was just such a turning point. I've never felt the same about grief again. And of course, I had to learn how to live without her physical touch, her beautiful blue eyes. But instead, I got this gift of oneness at 11:11. And if you know Dan, you know, he has these beautiful blue eyes. And it was, my life just changed in an instant. And I got to befriend grief